Hola, mi gente. Welcome to the Limbo Latino podcast. I am your host, Joseph Colon, a.k.a. the Limbo Latino, and I'm honored to be hosting you all in the Limbo Latino Sala. As you know, this is our place to get together, chop it up, and meet some amazing people. So to all the listeners and viewers of the podcast, I have a treat for you today and cannot wait to introduce you to our guest who has been a pioneer in her field for many years and continues to be a leader in her profession. But before we start the show, your homework, once again, if you forgot, is very simple. Dame un favor, and wherever you find this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and comment. This will allow us to continue our progress upward and give space to reframing our history, hearing from our movers and shakers in the Latinx world, and it will ensure our reach to the masses. Also, make your way to the YouTube channel where you will find a longer version of the interview. Firstly, I dedicate this podcast to our ancestors, contributions, and the sacrifices they made to allow us to be who we are. So if y'all are ready, today's episode, like I said, is going to be special. My guest today is a reunion of sorts for me in this space. My guest is a friend from our high school days, and I have had the esteemed privilege and honor of following her meteoric rise as a professional in the world of marketing. Lizette Williams is a leading marketing and advertising executive with expertise at driving the convergence of brands and culture. She has worked across Fortune 50 companies driving consumer-centric growth strategies focused on cultural relevancy. In 2019, she was named an Adweek Innovator and Chicago Business Journal Woman of Influence. She is one of the foremost awarded marketing executives in the field and was also inducted into the American Advertising Federation Advertising Hall of Achievement, the premier industry recognition for leaders under 40 who are making a significant impact in the industry and their communities. She has also been listed as Crain Chicago Business 40 Under 40, Advertising Age Women to Watch, and Black Enterprises Top Women Executives in Advertising and Marketing. I'd like to bring Lizette onto the show and welcome. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'd like to thank you first for coming to the show and can't wait for everyone to get to know you and your work. Now, on my show, I'd like to start off with simple prompts and allow the listeners and viewers to understand your background and how your identities connect with your story. So how does that sound? Does that sound good?
Perfect. Let's go.
I hope you don't divulge too much about our friendship and our past, but I don't think I have anything to hide, which is good. But I'm so happy to see you again and just really, I've been so proud of you. I used to be her big brother, and now I feel like I'm the little brother. Tell us your story, and who do you bring into this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. My story, the origins are really a neighborhood in the South Bronx, right by Yankee Stadium. I'm Puerto Rican, first gen, born and raised in New York City, so I'm a New Yorican. My mom came over from Puerto Rico when she was 13, and I grew up in the birthplace of culture, really the birthplace of hip hop, at a time when music was really coming up in that world. Culture was a big part of my life. I speak fluent Spanish. I grew up very culturally Puerto Rican, but also understanding that I was Black. So there was a convergence of intersectionality, I think, from the inception of when I was born. I got this incredible opportunity to go to boarding school, as you know, when I was 14 and went to this tiny fancy school in New England. It was the first time I spoke to a white person my own age. Was the first day that I arrived on that campus. I had never spoken to a white person my age until 9th grade, which, as you know, was complete culture shock. And I always tell people they're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars of education right now. But this was not the girl that showed up the first day of school in the 9th grade. I think I had some Timbs on and like a Perry Ellis jacket. I was very urban, but it really was a formative experience for me. And I think the beginning of my activism and stayed with me throughout life at this point. First person in my family to go to college. So shout out to all the first gens out there listening to this. Went on to go to Columbia, the London School of Economics, a master's at Northwestern, and the rest is history. And I think what I've always carried with me is a real appreciation for culture and an empathy for consumers, diverse consumers, especially because of my background. So I basically used my educational attainment and all the experience I got to go drive change in the world of advertising. My life's work is focused on evolving the depiction of people of color in advertising and media. And that's what I've dedicated my life to now throughout my career, things I do outside of work, the boards I sit on, and basically everything I do is focused on that.
That's awesome. I definitely see a lot of your work that you've been able to put out there, particularly for a lot of these, big name companies. I think about that representation. So it's awesome to have someone in a driving seat really pushing that and making sure that we're represented and at least seen in the marketing world, really, which is a very difficult task or has been in the past few years. Speaking about that, can you share with the audience a glimpse of the world of marketing and advertising and how you've been able to authentically show up in that space and being an empowering agent within the field?
Yeah, it's been a journey. I don't think I was here at the beginning. I started in the advertising industry out of business school after I graduated from Northwestern. I spent 5 years at PepsiCo. My 5 years there were just foundational, just learning the practice and the art of marketing and advertising. So I learned it very quickly, moved very fast. And then I got this incredible opportunity to be the first multicultural marketer hired in the history of Kimberly-Clark. And they wanted me to come build this thing. I'd never done it before, but I was president of our diverse employee resource group at Pepsi, and I had a real passion for it. So people knew that, and I was a good marketer. So I started off with one brand, Huggies, when I took that job, and it was a life-changing experience. I think that was the moment where I figured out what I was supposed to be when I grew up. No one had ever heard of me at that point, and I was like, I need to figure out how to drive this business. The business was in decline. The only people having babies during that time were Hispanic women, and they did not know how to reach Latinas. I had actually just had my second child before I took that job, and so I was really close to the demographic. That blew up. I turned the business around, and then I went to the board of directors and got an expanded role overseeing Huggies, Kleenex, Scott, You by Kotex, Cottonelle, and Viva, and figuring out how to drive sales with all diverse consumer groups across all the businesses. 5.5 years later, I get this gig at McDonald's, not only doing multicultural marketing, but overseeing music, sports, and entertainment, digital and social, experiential, and I felt like everything under the sun, and really started to drive transformative change there, really focused on culture. So I went above kind of diverse markets and how do we really embed culture into the work we were doing, but always with a lens at remaining respectful of our consumers, because what I was not going to do is make the consumers a target. I'm like, we're not here to target and exploit people. How do we tell their stories authentically and start to really evolve the work that we're doing? These companies are putting billions of dollars of media into the industry every day. And as marketers, we have a responsibility and accountability to tell those stories and depict them appropriately. So it was a great time. I'm at Meta, formerly known as Facebook now, in an expanded global role, which has been really fun because I'm really sitting at the intersection of culture and digital and everything else, working at a social media company. So it's been a really, really interesting experience.
That's awesome that you be able to. I did. It's funny. I think I do remember you saying that you kind of came into the roles that you initially you didn't have experience in speaking about the Huggies piece, and then you were just thrusted into that space.
I was.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then exponentially, you just blew up. It was, that's a great story. As we all kind of share, even our undergrad and graduate education, we think we're going to do a specific thing, and we end up kind of in that space, but not really. And maybe even our dream job changes as we grow into ourselves. You talked a little bit about Meta. So, what's your position right there? What are you in charge of, and how do you see, your future there as far as, being an influencer in that change, particularly in the marketing area?
Yeah, I was really intentional about taking this role. I want to be a chief marketing officer eventually, and I knew that I needed to get a digital native experience. So I sought this out to round out all the experience I had on brand and culture. Right now, I have a global role. It's a B2B marketing role where I'm overseeing, I think, 7 industries. It's CPG, retail, auto, gaming, e-commerce, and government, politics, and nonprofits. And how do we leverage Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram as a platform to really help clients reach consumers in an appropriate way? So it's been a very different role, but it's been a really unique experience and an interesting experience for me in terms of how to leverage social media and digital tools to not only grow businesses, but to also engage consumers in a way that is respectful and appropriate.
And to see it from that perspective, right? The responsibility accountability on the back end is
Absolutely.
really, it's a lot different. So in thinking about your whole career and your profession, I wanted you to kind of, I guess, tap into kind of your, in a time machine, if you will. What has changed or morphed, and what are some challenges around representation and the things you've seen throughout the years in your, your career and your profession, but even outside of that, what are some things that, have been influences in the way that we are doing business, one, two, how we're being socially conscious and how we're authentically showing up?
I think it's night and day from when I started out in the industry. I mean, I was 17 when I got my first corporate job. I was in Inroads. I was an Inroads intern. I spent my first summer at Business Week magazine, just graduated from the 12th grade. And I think during that time, we were fed this formula. The narrative that we were given was that we had to assimilate into the best version of white men that we could be in order to get ahead, right? So I remember my first summer out of high school before I went to college, I would just, oh my God, just stress about what I was going to wear to work. I didn't have money to buy fancy clothes. I barely had money to get on the subway, get a Metro card to eat lunch, much less I need to buy these clothes. I didn't know what to talk to my coworkers about. There was so much that I was trying to juggle, not only learning the job, but trying to fit into corporate culture that was very unfamiliar to me. And to this day, I don't think corporate America was designed for us. We're doing the best we can to navigate those hallways. And I think I've done a fine job, but it wasn't created for me. And I'm very cognizant of that. And I spent a long time trying to fit into boxes and assimilate as best I can and say the right things, read the New York Times on the subway going in. So I'd have things to talk about with my coworkers and follow the stock market and everything that we were told we had to do, wear muted nail polish, get navy blue suits, all of the things. But what I realized in the process of doing that was that I was losing the very thing that made me unique. So you asked me what has evolved, it's me. So around the time I took the Kimberly-Clark role and figured out what I was supposed to be when I grew up, I was like, I'm going to stop doing this. And I'm just going to start showing up as me. If that's not for you, then that's cool too. But I think at that point, I was like, I need to not only do this for me, I need to do this for all the young people of color and women coming up behind me that are now looking at me and trying to emulate me. So I stopped straightening my hair. I was wearing Jordans to work. I went all the way business casual. I'm like, listen, you want me to drive? I make old brands dope again. That's literally what I do. Y'all hired me to make your stodgy brand dope. I'm showing up how I show up in the world, and I show up with Jordans. So y'all about to get these Jordans and this natural hair. That's how I'm showing up to work. And I just started doing that. And it was interesting when I joined McDonald's, I was coming in with this big hair and rocking the Jordans and just being me, and then showing up in meetings and running a whole bunch of advertising campaigns. The entire floor of young women, white women included, stopped straightening their hair. And it was a sign to me during that time that they were looking at me for cues on what a professional looks like. And up until that point, I had sold into this narrative that what a professional looked like was emulating a white man. And the minute that I stopped doing that and showing up as myself, not only did I grow these businesses and, by the way, drive credibility for the work that I do, because I look like one of our consumers that we're trying to engage anyway, but I made it permissible for everyone else in the office to be their authentic self. And so that's been a big part of the platform that I've been driving in corporate America. I don't know if you saw this thing I posted on LinkedIn, but I recently took a headshot and I wore a hot pink dress. My hair, I picked out my hair, was super big, natural. I had hot pink nails. And that was my headshot. I was getting a big award. And that was the headshot that I was using for the award. And it caused a firestorm on LinkedIn. There was hundreds of comments. People were arguing because the post that I wrote was about professionalism and what that means and how long I had bought into the narrative. And it was draining to try to show up as a good white guy versus showing up as who I am and bringing all my swag to the table. The minute I started doing that, my career took off. Literally, my career took off. I wasn't expending energy to be something that I wasn't. And it was just dope. People see me as credible when I come in and I'm trying to drive strategies to engage Black and Latinx consumers. And I'm the person that comes to the meeting with the Northwestern MBA and the Columbia degree. And I have some Jordans on. You're like, yeah, we probably should listen to her. But it was interesting because I think there were all sides of the table. But I make it a point now to show up that way in spaces, especially when I'm talking to young people, because I need them to see me as themselves. And to know that it's attainable, not to lose yourself in the journey to getting through the corporate climb.
So I do want to brag a little bit about you, because one of the things that I also saw some comments about your leadership on LinkedIn in particular from folks who work with you. And as I was scrolling through, I kind of was just really proud of the fact that that was the first thing that they talked about, was the authenticity of self and what they learned from you, and exactly how they felt much more empowered to come into those spaces, those corporate spaces, as themselves. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, she's always been like that.
Exactly.
which is dope, because a lot of people, I talk about this fairly often, but particularly the diaspora is very, very much so has the capacity, and they have the wherewithal of self already embedded, that success, the resiliency, just all that stuff. And so when I read that, I thought to myself, oh, this must be what their background is. But this was someone who literally took the time to write in the comment section about your leadership, and that your authenticity helped them in showing them that they were okay who they were. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that, stay on that, because I think one of the pieces that I think is probably one of the most problematic things is that sometimes, like you said, it's hit or miss, hot and cold, especially in the corporate world, when you talk about whether or not, especially with social justice issues kind of propping themselves up, especially during the pandemic. But there were, attempts for corporations to kind of get in line with a lot of the social justice pieces. But I also, in working with other folks in industry, as far as, the corporate world, I also noticed young folks that were coming into that space still not feeling connect or even being able to be authentic. So for folks who are navigating that space in particular, where they don't have the power or don't feel like they have power, you illustrate it completely, your track. But what are some tidbits and things in which someone could actually, activate that in their workspace or and what they should be involved in once they start maybe their first job in the corporate world, and what should they always have as the prize ahead of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the thing that people don't talk about enough is the fact that we as people of color actually have everything that we need to drive successful corporate careers. And I want to stay there a little bit, because I really want to harp on this point. I'm actually working on a book where this is like the platform. This is the thing that I want people to understand. We sit here and we emulate white corporate culture and try to be this thing, when we rest on a legacy of people who are the most resilient people that ever existed in the universe. And if we just rested on our ancestors, we could do everything we need to do in the corporate world. Like, there is no one more resilient than people that came here that didn't want to be here to begin with, right? And then figured out how to navigate this country, a place that still struggles to accept us, right? So think about the level of resiliency that you need to have to even navigate the world as a person of color in this country, not 50 years ago, but like right now, okay? And then you get into these corporate rooms, and what's the number one thing you need when you're navigating a corporate career? Resiliency, right? Let's talk about resourcefulness. Nobody is more resourceful than someone that has not been handed resources and figures out how to get ahead. There's so many different situations that I show up to at work. The budget gets cut, the share is down. We need to pivot on a campaign because something happened. Man, if I don't know how to figure out how to make $1 out of 15 cents, it's literally called my life. I'm like, oh, I'm not stressed about this. I've done this before a million times over in other aspects of my personal life. So while other people in the office are running around stressed, I'm like, okay, the budget got slashed. I'm gonna figure out how to work this out. This is what I do. Resiliency and resourcefulness. That's how we show up. And then I think the icing on the cake is just the swag. Like, we can sit here and talk about how U.S. mainstream culture emulates Black and Latinx culture, and that is actually seen and heralded as the prize here in this country. And then we go back and we hide that, and then we're trying to figure out why we're not getting ahead. No, we should be celebrating that. We should be celebrating the fact that mainstream culture is actually wanting to be like us. You think about trends in music, sports, every single aspect, it's based on people of color. So why not lean into that? So I wish I would have done this a lot sooner, by the way. I think I waited entirely too long to be like, I'm just going to be my authentic self at work and see what happens. I think obviously you need to knock out your job and be great at what you do every single day. But then I think expanding the swagger and what you bring and the skill sets. And like, for me, when I was first starting out at Pepsi, I didn't have a flashy role, but I was killing the role I had. You know, I was managing a budget for the brand, the Quaker brand at that time, $50 million budget. I wound up not only managing it, but I wrote the manual for every single new hire after me on how to do it. That's because we do that as a people. Like, I'm like, you realize that most of us are the first people in our families to go to college. We're literally writing the rule book as we go and navigating ambiguity consistently. So we can take those skill sets and build it at work. That's something you can do early on. Then I got involved with diversity related issues at work. So I mentioned I was the president of the Diverse Employee Resource Group. I was managing relationships with diversity recruiting and on campus and HBCUs and everything else. And I was showing up for the company in those spaces in a really polished and professional way. And what that did was give me access to very senior leaders, but not related to my work. So I was able to develop networks and relationships with people because they were like, oh, she's dope. Like, she was at National Black MBA on the stage talking about PepsiCo. Like, you know, a VP is recognizing that. And I'm able to now navigate my professional career because I'm doing some of these things on the side. And then my side hustle became my main hustle when I took that multicultural marketing role. Because I was like, you know what, I do this like as my side hustle. Let me try to figure out if I combine these things together, my personal and professional passion, what that would look like. And so I think there's a lot more leeway than people think. I think early on, it's easy to try to fit into a box and try to be what you think you should be. But if we lean into just being ourselves and walking in our authenticity, I think we could be so much more powerful.
I agree. I think we don't, again, like you said, lean into your ancestry because they're propping you up and they know exactly what it takes for you to be successful. Something that you really touched upon that kind of also hit me is to gain access to those high-level C-suite type of situations or relationships, particularly for those who are not skilled in the diversity world, so to speak, quote unquote, or even understanding people of color, BIPOC, and so on and so forth. That's your opportunity to show up not just as a checking a box, but also being an innovator. You know, thinking about what other people are doing and elevating it to another level. And, you know, you talked about ERGs. One of the things I've talked about is when a new professional, go find your ERG, figure out how to navigate those systems. And then also don't be afraid of your voice really resounding and providing experiences and lending that support piece for your company, but also challenging them when they need to. So it's really cool
I agree.
You do that. Yeah, that's cool.
I want to add something here because I think I was very discouraged to do this early in my career. And I remember first it was when I was at Pepsi taking the role as president of the Diverse Employee Resource Group. And I remember a more senior level marketer telling me that I shouldn't take that role and I should just run Northwestern recruiting because I was going to be seen as too Black at work. And I think there's this misconception. So we try to lean away from it because we want to fit into the mainstream. And I was like, I'm not going to do that because I'm not passionate about Northwestern recruiting. Like, I actually want to get more of us here. So I'm going to go do this. And then it came again when I wound up taking that role at Kimberly-Clark. First of all, Pepsi was like shocked I was taking that job and I turned down a promotion to go take that. And I remember one of my mentors, very well-meaning, told me, you don't have to do this job. You're really talented and super bright. And I just don't know why you would take a multicultural marketing job. Like, you don't have to do this. You can do like a regular marketing job. And like, why would you want to do this? And I was like, I just want to do this because I care. And I just feel like it's the right thing to do. And I want to take the skills that I learned here and apply it there. And like, why shouldn't your top talent go do these jobs, right? Why shouldn't that? And I think a lot of times we can be discouraged from leaning in to our ethnicity because of the way corporate culture is set up. But I've taken each of those opportunities, and every single time I have gotten way further ahead than if I stood mainstream, and I'm so happy I did it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect illustration of, you know, you're able to infiltrate systems and do more in certain times and spaces. You know, you obviously want to learn the trade, you want to learn your profession. But ultimately, that's also part of the profession, right? That part of the multicultural piece. Like, you also have to know other identities that people, you know, people like to know that you have their best interest, that you're focused on them. And I think that's just a great example, you know, that you became such a subject matter expert in your field, but then you also had a calling to do multicultural marketing because you live it, you love it, and that's just what you do. And it catapulted you in ways that were unforeseen, even for people who well-intentioned, but they also didn't get what you were doing. And so kudos to you. That's awesome. Well, I would not be a good brother if I didn't highlight your sisterhood. So I wanted to speak on your influences, particularly around your sorority, because I think it talks about your Afro-Latinidad, So Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. Wanted you to talk a little about that organization, why, it's important to you, how it's influenced you, and talk about like why it's important to talk about the diaspora in the sense, and particularly around Afro-Latinidad.
Yeah, absolutely. I love my sorority. So shout out to any Zetas who might be listening. I pledged in undergrad when I was at Columbia. Not only did I make a decision to pledge a Black sorority, but Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated is actually a very Afrocentric sorority. If you look at any of the history and what it's about, and it's always interesting when I tell people, usually they're surprised. But then I'm like, if you know anything about my personality and how much I am for the culture and what I'm about, you're going to be like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But so it was really important to me, one, to connect with a group of progressive women that are my sisters and that I really have a shared vision for community and uplifting other young women of color and just the principles of service and the things that we really stand for. But the sorority itself is actually very diverse. At least when I pledged in New York, my best friend is also a Zeta. She's Puerto Rican. We had a wide diaspora of Black, Latinx, Asian, white sorors, and it's been really amazing, but continuing really to push the vision forward. And I'm proud of my Afro-Latina heritage. It's something I talk about consistently. I think part of the reason that I was created to be in this world is to drive intersectionality and connection between those two communities. And I wouldn't be doing what I was called to do if I didn't do that consistently. So I mentioned I speak fluent Spanish. I'm very culturally Latina. I cook Spanish food. I love salsa, reggaeton. I'm very Puerto Rican, but I also love like old school hip hop, and I'm in a Black sorority. I grew up in the Bronx, I'm with it. So I try to bring the convergence of communities together. And I think bringing in the sorority was just a part of that.
Now, I added that in there because I know that was such a huge part of your college career in particular, but also your life, because lots of folks don't understand, your fraternity, sorority, particularly, HBCUs, things like that, those cultural dynamics and the cultural milestones that people hit when they go into their young adulthood, they extend beyond that. And so to be able to see a lot of my brothers and sisters in those fraternities and sororities, and particularly the sororities who have been phenomenal at leading the charge around social justice issues, and even taking large, amazing positions of power across the nation in different industries. I mean, just be able to see that representation, and the first thing that comes out their mouth is their sorority. So it's really cool to kind of connect the dots there in particular. So what is your proudest moment professionally? And I think I know personally what your proudest moment is, but we'll leave that one for the later part. But what do you think?
I can't start with personal.
But I really wanted to tap into that because I think that those are also influences. And I think, I asked you at the beginning to tap into a memory that possibly really either jarred you or even, pushed you professionally. But can you kind of give us a glimpse of, what you deem as your most proudest moment?
Yeah, it probably was my my induction into the Advertising Hall of Achievement, which is, by the way, it's like the biggest thing you can get if you're under 40 in the industry. And it's really hard to get it. You have to be nominated. It's like a whole thing. And I had to go to the induction ceremonies. They were in San Francisco, and give a speech in front of 1,000 people. And it's 7 or 8 people a year that get inducted. And it's a whole thing. It's like the Illuminati once you're in it. So my mom flew out. My mom, who didn't even graduate from high school, was a teenage mom, and got on a plane for 7 hours from New York to San Francisco. I got her a suite at the Fairmont, had glam, hair and makeup, everything laid out for my mom to be part of that experience. She doesn't even know what I do, by the way. She just just rolls. But I had her together, and you get 4 minutes to give this speech. And I was getting the honor of a lifetime at that point. And the speech that I gave, I decided to use that moment and that platform and dedicated my speech to every hustler, doer, people who have been told no, people who've had to get up and try again and fight another day. Because the work that I've done and what people don't really understand is it's taken a lot of courage. I've gotten a lot of no's. People see the awards and the interviews, but it's been extremely hard to navigate a corporate career as myself, showing up in the skin and who I am, and then to push an agenda forward that is actually contrary to how corporate America was built. So just marinate on that and what I had to do to have that moment, and then to have my mom sit in the audience, a woman that had a baby when she was 17 and grew up in the projects, as a single mom trying to do the best she can. It is beyond her wildest imagination that I am me. Like, I can't, she can't even fathom this life that I have. It's like, and so it was just such a big moment for me when I got on the stage. I was the last person to speak, to give that speech. It wasn't just about getting the honor, because that honor wasn't just for me. That honor was from my mom, who had to, she wrapped gifts at Bloomingdale's after her 9-to-5 job and during the holidays to make extra money for us to even have food. This wasn't like luxurious living. But for every person that, I had to make decisions sometimes between buying a book and eating a meal when I was in college. You know what I'm saying? Like, every person that had to just fight through life to just get the little bit that they had, that was who I did it for. And that was who I dedicated the speech. And I talked about that. I talked about this. I started the speech talking about this memory of sitting on the subway when I was a little girl. My mom worked downtown, and looking at the people getting on the train on 86th Street. That's when all the white people got on. And everybody looked so nice, and they had on nice clothes, and they smelled like perfume and money and leather purses. And I didn't know what those people did, but I just wanted to do whatever they did, because my community was so poor and just hard. It was a hard upbringing. And, when I think about that childhood and that little girl sitting on the train next to my mom, just trying to do the best we can, like, I'm one of those people now. And it's just such a blessing. And I wanted to just give it back to people and to inspire people, to let them know that I see them and that they need to keep going and that we have a world to change together. So it was an honor that I think was for everybody. So that was my professional moment. It was a big moment for me.
Ma did a good job, by the way. She rocked it. She knocked it out the park. So
she knows. And that's my girl. So, she's with me when I'm doing stuff and on the phone and everything.
How about your personal?
My personal is definitely the birth of my 2 babies, who are my legacies. You talk about generational wealth and what I'm building for them, not only from a wealth perspective, but in really them understanding and recognizing who they are, both as African American and Latinx children. Every day I look at them and that's all I have. If I did nothing else in my life but raise those kids for the rest of my life, like, I'm good. So they are everything to me. My daughter gave a speech last year. I got Advertising Woman of the Year for Chicago. So she gave the speech. She was 11 years old at the time. And and she talked about, I'm gone a lot. Like, before COVID, I travel a lot, and they have to share me with the world. Like, this work is not something that I was doing at home every single day. This work requires me to be in the world and to be in the face of the world so that I'm driving change. And so they've made huge sacrifices, but they are so great. Like, they understand that. And she knows exactly what I'm doing. I brought them to speeches with me. They've been all over with me. And she is just so proud of me. She talked about that, and it just was like, I was like, oh, you get what it is that I'm doing. Like, mommy is out there really trying to drive change, and I think I'm her hero, but she's my hero too. When I look at her and see who she's growing up to be and who my son is growing up to be, I'm just so proud of them.
Now, let me tell you something. That imprint right there, I mean, I'm visualizing that whole moment where your 11-year-old daughter is literally talking about her hero. I think your kids are ready for the world. The fact that you're teaching them all these things about who they are and themselves, but then, like, you're also sharing the opportunities with them to actually, that's pretty huge, to stand in front as an 11-year-old and give a speech about your hero. When I think about kind of the foundations of who we are and how we get there and how we do the investments of actually teaching ourselves or educating or even leaning on some of our ancestors or some of our OGs, if you're from our parts of the neighborhood, what are some things that you could share with the audience about what you would be some recommendations that people should dive into, whether it's podcasts or even articles, books, things that influenced you and particularly your identity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's so much. I will say my biggest influence has been other people. I have amazing mentors and sponsors that have pulled me up from the bottom up, that I'm so thankful for. But there's a couple of things that I've read. I like to read. So there's a book by Elaine Welteroth called More Than Enough. She was the first Black editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue. And she talks to her about her climb, and also walking in her authenticity. So I really enjoyed that book and reading. I read that during a time that was particularly challenging for me and really navigating that. I'm a student of culture, so there's like so many things that I consume on social media. Like, I can't even begin to list all of them. There's a book by Minda Harts, who I follow, who's a friend. Lovey Ajayi, who's, there's like so many different folks. Plural, Pavel Martinez, that he actually focuses on Latinx culture and really walking in your authenticity, and does this Swag and Substance series. I was on that, where he highlights Latino professionals that are just walking in who they are as well. So there's a lot. Like I'm a sneakerhead. Like I'm like constantly consuming content. Like I follow music. So all I do on social is like, I'm just taking it in, because what I then wind up doing is pushing it out in my work. Right. So if I'm on the constant pulse of culture and creativity and like what's happening ear to the streets, then I'm on the cusp of like what's dope. The other thing I do is Friday mornings, I actually block that time. A lot of people think this is crazy as a executive. I block Friday mornings for mentorship sessions, and I get a lot of people reaching out to me. It'll be like a 23-year-old sneakerhead who wants to start an Instagram shop and wants to like talk to me. I take those calls, and my assistant knows. She'll block Friday mornings, and I'm just back to back with like young people, like listening to what they have to say, pouring into them. Part of it is, I think part of my responsibility in this world is to lift as I climb, because I've been given so much. But the other part of that is like, it keeps me fresh. Like it keeps me having an ear to the streets. And if I can't, you're in the ivory tower. Sometimes I feel like I can get so far away that I can't make a decision at work, because I can't hear the consumer. I can't hear young people. I can't hear Latinx communities, because I'm too far now in where I am in life. And so Friday mornings keeps me like very young, very fresh. I could talk to people, like regular people that are just trying to engage with me. And so I do that very consistently. And that's actually probably been one of the most helpful things that I've done for myself personally, because that also feeds me, mentoring others, but also professionally, because I could sit at work and be like, that's whack, dude. We should not do that. Like nobody's doing that. This don't even sound right. Like, nope.
That sounds actually like stuff I do at work as well. I'm like, this sounds whack. It's funny. As we kind of code switch back and forth, because I think it's just innate in just the way in our culture. Period. Like we're professionals, but at the end of the day, like you talk about Tim's, I go to work sometimes in Tim's, like on Fridays in particular, and people go, "What in the world? Where are you from?" And I'm like, "I'm from Brooklyn," and it just comes out, and it's just the authenticity is really cool, because it's also professional. Like to me, that's professional. Like I can be professional in that space just as I am.
Exactly. So I'll tell you two funny things about me. One, I quote rappers constantly at work, but unless you're into hip hop, you won't know. But people on my team will know, because they're young. So I'll be like, I have 99 problems and pricing isn't one of them. Like people on the team actually know. And the other thing is, last year I presented a major strategy on the vision and approach for my team, for my whole organization. And as part of that presentation that I gave in front of the whole executive leadership, I used the story of the come up of Jay-Z. I don't know if you remember this, but Jay-Z used to be like on everybody's diss track back in the day. And what he started doing around 2001, actually September 11th, because I gave this whole thing about the blueprint, was doing like mad collabs. That's how he got his name back out there, as he started doing mad collabs with people and started getting respect and credibility in the industry. And then he went back to do a solo album, and I related it back to my organization because they were at a trying place when I first started. And I talked about the importance of cross-functional partnership. Like I brought it all the way back. And then at the end, I closed with like, we got our swagger back. And so swagger became like the big thing from my org. And that is literally how I lead at work. That is like a perfect example that I was like, we're basing this on the story of Jay-Z, the rise of Jay-Z. And we're about to follow this. And I need y'all out there making strong cross-functional partnerships so that we drive credibility internally so that we could blow up and then do our own thing. It's worked beautifully. I promise you, it's worked beautifully. That is
the dopest story I ever heard of cross-cultural corporate conversations in the workplace and intersectional, intergenerational. Yeah, that's awesome. I may have to reference you at some point on that. That's kind of dope. All right, so we are diving at the end of the show, but I wanted to make sure that you had the last word, in a sense, about any parting words of wisdom or maybe a great saying, and what you want to leave with the familia here in the Limbo Latino podcast and why it's important.
Yeah, no, it's my favorite quote. There's a quote by Mark Twain. I have it over my desk. It's like the thing that I live by. And that is, true courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. And so, I always tell people at every juncture of my education and career, I've been scared. Like my whole life is one unknown. Every corner I'm turning down, I don't know what's at the other end. It just keeps working out. Like, but I've never been here before. I just always act like I've been here before. I ain't never been here before, right? And so there is fear and trepidation at various stages, but I've learned to channel that into an energy that feeds me and catapults me forward. And it's important when you are experiencing that, which is not uncommon. So I want to normalize that. First of all, it's okay to feel that way, but also to leverage courageous leadership in those moments and to use your voice for good and continue to push forward. So look, we got a world to change. Let's keep pushing forward and keep leveraging courageous leadership.
My sister, thank you so much for being a part of this show. I love you dearly, and I'm so impressed and so grateful to have your friendship. If anybody wants to follow you, do you have any like hashtags? Do you have obviously you work for Meta, so you obviously have the Instagram gig going.
You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Lizette W1.
And those Friday morning things, if people are interested, how do they sign up? What application process they need to go through?
You gotta get my assistant on board. So shoot me a note and I'll try to connect people with her. It might be a few months out though. I'm just letting people know.
No, you're a busy woman. I mean, hello. People got to understand. Yeah. So, I appreciate you not only being on the show, but really being a source of just what we are about. It's just a prime example of not only our people, the resiliency, but what we can accomplish collectively. And I think that the fact that you tap into your history and your background and lean on your ancestors is just on par with your success story. So you keep doing what you're doing and keep making us proud. So thank you so much, Lizette. I love you.
Appreciate you. Love you too.